our objective today is to hear from one another as it relates to our perceptions about criminal justice and thoughts, considerations concerning where we are and what our community experiences are and how we can sort of begin to work towards improving ourselves as it relates to equity in this issue, on this issue. As you all are perhaps aware, we have had 4 previous sessions on areas ranging from education to health and social services. Well, we've had 3, and we will have 1 tomorrow, which will be on our clerical religious community in our neighborhoods. And then we also had our first session, which was on business and media. And each of them are aimed at addressing the central issue of our time, I believe, which is an issue of equity, much of which has been illustrated by national events recently. And I take it not robbery for the fact that you all have chosen to spend an hour and a half or 2 with us this afternoon to discuss this topic at this time. What I will say to each of you is that what we have learned, and you will learn in this conversation perhaps, is that all of these issues are interconnected. And at the end of the day, I think it is incumbent upon all of us to pay attention to the subsequent issues as it relates to the other sessions. And so at this time, I'm going to share a little bit about the meeting, and then I will introduce this afternoon's facilitator, and we will convene with our session. After you've joined the meeting, the technicians will and have enabled your ability to use your microphone. Participants using mobile devices for this meeting cannot use a video. However, they can use the raise hand feature in order to speak, and they will be acknowledged according to staff and our facilitator. Requests to speak are automatically prioritized by the meeting software when the raise hand feature is used. If you are in the meeting by video, you can't use your, you don't have the raise hand feature. A meeting technician will unmute microphones for participants. All other participants can exercise control of their microphone and camera if you are utilizing your camera. Meeting technicians will use the chat feature to communicate important information. If you happen to need to contact us during this session, you may do so at equityinitiative@codb.us, or you may call us at 671, that's 386-671-8203 for additional comments and questions. I would ask that you all take that email address and please consider, if you have information that you want to share with us and you want the rest of the groups to see, share it with us, and that we will then get it out. And I will revisit that issue towards the end of the meeting as I try to give us some direction as we move forward. And so criminal justice is a central issue in America at this time. It's a central issue all over the place. As mayor of Daytona Beach, I've historically and currently been very proud of our police department. And as I've always said, there's always room for improvement. And this session is about that for all of us. And today we have a very accomplished presenter in the area of criminology. His name is Dr. Randy Nelson. He currently serves as director of Bethune-Cookman University Criminal Justice Administration Graduate Program and Center for Law and Social Justice within the College of Liberal Arts. Dr. Nelson's academic background includes a degree in sociology from Eckerd College, master's degree in criminology from the University of South Florida, and a PhD in criminology from Florida State University. He has secured over $6 million in state, federal, and private funding to address racial disparities within Florida's criminal juvenile justice, education, dependency, and health systems. Dr. Nelson is also the founder of the Situational Environmental Circumstances mentoring model, which is a great model for mentoring young males, particularly African-American males, where he partners them with college graduates or undergraduate students who come from similar backgrounds, and he marries and partners the two of them together in a mentor-mentee situation. Additionally, Dr. Nelson is a nationally recognized law enforcement training consultant in the areas of community policing and engagement strategies. As the coordinator of the Florida Historically Black Colleges and Universities Law Enforcement Training and Recruitment Symposiums, he has worked collaboratively with Florida Sheriff's Association, the Florida State Conference of the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, to host law enforcement and community engagement town hall forums across the state. I think you will agree that we have a most accomplished and capable facilitator. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nelson as our facilitator for this afternoon session. Dr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate it and look forward to the dialogue. And I want to commend you for actually taking the leadership, being able to have these conversations. These conversations are going on across the country, but I think they have to be held in a constructive manner in order for us to move. You can have a lot of people talking past and between each other, but I think it takes a constructive conversation. So I commend you for allowing us the environment and a platform to do that. Whether you're black, white, green, yellow, Jew, or Gentile, Republican or Democrat, you want a safe, nurturing, and just environment to raise your families. So we start there. That's the start of the conversation. We all agree on that. Now, the mechanisms and the processes, how you deliver that will be the topic of conversation. And I only ask that you have respectful conversations. I mean, I think that we don't have to all agree with what the other individual is saying, but I think we all have to be respectful of that platform. And if we do that, I think this will be a very, very constructive conversation. I have two individuals to help in terms of to get the thoughts, the ideas and recommendations. Dr. Kadishta Yusuf, also at Bethune-Cookman University, and Janice Allen Kelson help document some of the information that is being obtained. And I know the mayor, some of this is being recorded, so that'll help as well. I think when we reconvene, at least we'll have a synthesized document that includes all of our ideas, thoughts, and so forth. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm ready to start.
Before we do that, I've neglected to do something. You guys will see in the top corner, the left-hand corner, a picture of contrasting equality and equity. Just take a look at that, and it's not my definition, but it is. The fact is that I've said this to each group, and I didn't want to
Absolutely.
You all. The one illustrates equality, and the other illustrates equity. And for those of you who and those of us who believe in equality, which I think all of us believe on some measure of equality, we have to go beyond that to equity, and it can only be achieved by intentional design and effort. And in the second frame there's an intentional effort to give the young fellow or the youngest participant an opportunity to see the game, see what's going on. And that's really what this entire initiative is about. It's about making sure that everyone is able to be beneficiaries of our society in a way that allows them to have access to health care, education, to jobs, just to participate and be engaged. And we have to kick the barriers down, as was done in this picture, by giving the person what they needed. So thank you, and I apologize because that should have been done earlier. Go ahead, Dr. Nelson.
And that's a perfect segue. I think that's a perfect segue in our conversation. And we'll just apply that to the criminal justice system. because I think it's apropos to the work that we're about to undertake. When you think of the criminal justice system, every element of it, from the police to the courts, corrections, that applies to the conversation. So whether we want to structure this structure in a manner where we address issues with policing first and then move on to the courts and corrections and judiciary, however we want to do that. But I think it probably would be better if we structure them into stages and start with the police. And one of the things that typically happen when you have this conversation, when you talk to the community, they blame the police. When you talk to police, they blame the community of media. So I think that this would be a conversation to start relative to, and we have Deputy Chief Young on, and I think it would be a good conversation. Deputy Chief, your perception of the policing, the current state of policing relative to, but also to Daytona. So if you can start that conversation there with how do we achieve, looking at that picture, how do we achieve it, and recognizing that the police themselves can't fix everything. And if we were to take away all of the racist police officers off the force and get them out of the force, we'll still have a lot of the issues that we have relative to crime. So that being said, I want you to at least start the conversation about where and how you, since we're talking in Daytona, you and the agent can get to that point of equity in policing.
Okay, first of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, first of all, for those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Jakari Young, and I am the Deputy Chief of Police right here in the beautiful city of Daytona Beach. I have been here for 19 years, just shy of 2 decades, all of which have been right here in Daytona. I landed here in the late 90s, 1996, in the form of a Bethune-Cookman College student. I'm a 2-time graduate of Bethune-Cookman, so I'm very familiar with our moderator and a few of the other panelists that are participating in this today. So Doc, I'm gonna go ahead and throw out this disclaimer. Don't be afraid to cut me off, because when you break down the criminal justice system into parts and you wanna start with policing itself can take the whole 2 hours. We know that, so I'm gonna try to kind of keep it, you know, even keel as much as we move through. But just to answer the question, when you think of equity in criminal justice, to say that equity in criminal justice is important is probably the understatement of the year, because I believe without equity in criminal justice, that is the difference between freedom and incarceration, and even more so, the lack of equity in criminal justice can also be the difference between life and death. And I think equity, or the lack thereof, is a huge reason that our country has been protesting for the past 2 months. So when you talk about just one thing that we can do from a policing standpoint to achieve equity, the first thing that jumps out to me is community engagement and community involvement, because without the community, the police are largely ineffective. It goes all the way back to Sir Robert Peel, where he talked about the police are the community and the community are the police. So without community engagement and community involvement, I don't see how we will ever completely achieve an equitable police department or police force. So I'll just cut it off there, and then we can continue as we move through.
I think that's an excellent point, Chief Young. And community engagement is everything relative. The trick is, how do you get to the engagement without the trust? To me, policing in the community is like a marriage. In a marriage, you have two-way accountability, give and take. You have holding focus. How do we bridge the trust gap so we can have true engagement? So that's another panelist that can get to that. How do we bridge that trust gap to get to engagement?
Well, I think one thing, just to continue on, consistency in our efforts is huge. I think, but let me put it this way. When you look at that event that took place on May 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota, our entire country, the entire world was outraged by what they witnessed in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I think the residents of Daytona Beach, I know for a fact, were just as outraged as everybody else in the country. But if you notice, our response was different than in a lot of areas. We were blessed that we didn't have to experience the looting and the rioting that took place in other areas of the country. And I think a large part of that had to do with the relationship that we've already established with our community members, because there's not a whole lot that's going to go on here in Daytona Beach without our community leaders reaching out to me directly and calling me on my cell phone. We don't mind being held accountable. We don't mind being transparent. And trust me, our community leaders here, they do a very good job. It's not a whole lot that's going to go on in any neighborhood throughout this city that someone is not going to either call my phone, call another member of the command staff's phone, or call the chief's phone. So I think just having that open dialogue with our community leaders has you know, it's been invaluable for us, because again, I know our people were just as upset about what took place as everywhere else, but our response was different. And I think that speaks to the fabric of our community. And I'm very proud of our community for how they responded. Yes, we had peaceful protests, but it was just that. It was extremely peaceful. We actually joined in one of the marches that led to the steps of City Hall. And that's something that, you know, I'm very proud of. And that's something that I'm gonna carry with me throughout the rest of my career.
So, thank you, Chief Young. I think you're absolutely right. I think times like this reveal what you have done. You know, a lot of police agents that have called our center want us to come in and do training, and this isn't the time to do training. This is the time to reflect what have you done prior to. Coming in at a time like this is very difficult, because usually when you're coming in at a time like this, it's things that folk haven't done, have any chips in the bank. Now, that being said, what are some of the things, and once again, this is a group conversation and everybody can add value to this conversation. So we didn't, there were no looting. I think that's a testament to the work. But for me, I'm thinking down the line, what is it that we're gonna do and continue to do or get better at? So it's Daytona Beach Police Department and the community are a shining example of what can we do more. So what we've done, I think, is I think we commended. The trick now is how do we continue to build and get better for later? And the conversation with us within this conversation, this chat, what can we do to continue to get better? What can we do to continue to get better?
Okay, so I'll take that one as well. The sheriff I was told that the sheriff was going to join us on this panel discussion. He may be running late, but I'll go ahead and field it all. One thing I can say in regards to what we can continue to do to get better is we can continue to place our policies, our training under a microscope, which is what we've done. That's what Minneapolis forced us to do. All of us had to go back and put our policies and our training under a microscope, just to ensure that we're doing everything to preserve life. And I can assure you that all of our policies center around the sanctity of human life. Even you, Doc, you know, you've come here, you've given us implicit bias training. We had another panelist that's on the phone, Dr. Chester Wilson. He came in and did some cultural diversity training with us. So this is something that we have been trying to get ahead of and stay ahead of for years to come. I'm very proud in the fact that even when you think about body cameras, I think the majority of our officers were wearing body cameras even prior to the Mike Brown incident in Ferguson, Missouri. And that incident kind of forced everybody else in law enforcement to kind of catch up. So when you talk about what we can continue to do, we continue to train. We continue to review our policies to make sure our policies are reflective of what we're trying to continue to achieve here in this city, which is a safe city, a thriving partnership with our community, and making sure that a contact with the police department doesn't end up deadly, because that's the last thing that we want. That is our focus. Hopefully that answers the question.
Right. One of the things that this conversation and dialogue has garnered is the diversity of law enforcement agencies. And I always say that if the only time Black and brown kids see law enforcement is when they're coming in and executing an arrest, it's almost like Pavlov's dog. That's what I see. I associate you with negative. What are some of the things that we're doing, not only as a community, because I think the recruitment of talented folks to go into a profession that has the authority under the law to take life and liberty, have to ensure that we get our best and brightest. What are we doing in Daytona Beach to ensure that some of the best and brightest are coming from South Daytona and other areas within Daytona Beach?
You know, not to toot my own horn, but I think I'm one of the best and the brightest. And I come from Bethune-Cookman University. And I think that is, it's right here in our own backyard. I come right out of the criminal justice program of Bethune-Cookman University. So we would be remiss if we did not use Bethune-Cookman, Embry-Riddle, Kaiser, Daytona State College to our advantage. We may not be the highest paying in the state, but when I got you here as a student and I can bring you in as an intern, that's what I usually use to convince them to stay and make Daytona Beach their home. I think I'm the best example of that, Doc. You know that. That's how you and I met, is when I went through your master's degree program. And I think we were able to recruit a few just in that time frame. So I think BCU is a huge advantage to us. All of our colleges and universities are a huge advantage to us when you talk about recruiting the best and brightest. And we're not afraid to travel. Our training crew will go to law enforcement seminars and symposiums that are outside of the area in order to draw the best and brightest to our organization. We also love our military veterans. We're not opposed to going to, you know, some of our military bases and the guys that are close to ending their career there and seeing if they want to continue to serve here in law enforcement. So to me, that is probably the best example, is just like I said, I use myself for an example. It was never my intent to stay here. I came here as a college student like everybody else, and I was going back home to South Florida. But majoring in criminal justice and doing my internship with the police department was how I got my foot in the door. And once I got my foot in the door here, I realized that this is where I wanted to be. And it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. So if I can use my own story and convince others that are in criminal justice to do the same, that has always been my goal throughout my career.
And to add to that, I think that you are an example. There are young men like you in Tallahassee to Pensacola. One of the things that I want, and I think is a part of that, you know, the cell phone used to be in a bag years ago. I'm dating myself, but now you can fit the cell phone in the palm of your hand. What are some of the strategies we can use, the young men and women that are born and raised there and the disadvantages there in Daytona? What are some of the strategies we can use to get them? Because that's the true testament to a police agency, that you have some homegrown folk that were born and raised right there. How do we get them to be members of the police department? Now, that's not all on police. I think the community have a role and a responsibility, just as particularly in the Black community and Black churches and community, you'll hear a lot about want their sons and daughters to be doctors, lawyers, and teachers. Rightfully so. I agree. But this conversation now and the movement now is such that you either can be a part of the solution, or you can sit back and talk about it. So one of the things we want to do is be the change you want to see. And I think having young men and young women that are born and raised in Daytona coming through changing, but also being leaders, chiefs, assistant chiefs, and so forth. What are some of the strategies to address those issues?
That is extremely difficult. I think I can remember even a year or so ago having a conversation with the mayor about that. And we were discussing how we recruit homegrown folks to stay here in Daytona. And I still teach when I can at the Law Enforcement Academy. And that is tough because it seems like there's this stigma that, you know, when you're born and raised and you've grown up with people, when you don that badge, you're going to lose some friends, and people are going to treat you differently once you go into law enforcement. And a lot of folks, they're not comfortable working in the same environment in law enforcement, in the same environment that they grew up with. So that's something that I really don't have an answer to. I do my best to just try to encourage them that this is a solid agency, that we're a family here, that we will support you here. And I try to play off of their strengths, being number one, the geography. Coming in from a different area, it may take you a while to learn the geography of the city, but when you're born and raised, you already know where you're going and you know everybody once you come on scene. So that is a huge plus for us as administrators to try to recruit folks to stay here and work here. But I hear it all the time teaching at the academy. They're like, I don't want to run into a bunch of people that I know and that I've grown up with and that I've played sports with, and now I get put into a situation to where I have to take them to jail. Some folks will understand it, and they understand that you're just doing your job, but the overwhelming majority, they're uncomfortable with it. So that is a huge challenge for us to try to be able to recruit folks that are born and raised right here in this community to stay and work here. It's tough. I'm open for advice. It's extremely tough.
My name is Christy Gillis. I work for the Department of Children and Families. I'm from Volusia County. I was on one of the board meetings earlier, but I want to say that Daytona Beach Police, whenever there's been some sort of community event or community engagement, I've worked for Department of Juvenile Justice. I've worked with human trafficking victims in our area, but whenever there's been an opportunity for Daytona Beach Police to be there and to be supportive in the community, there's never been a hesitation. We've had the chief come out quite a few times. We've had the victim advocates. We've had other law enforcement individuals that have come out and walked hand in hand with the social services agencies. We're working on bringing youth out there to those events. So I just want to commend Daytona Beach for doing that, because there's never a hesitation. It's always, what can we do? How can we, we'll be there. Just let us know. Just let us know the date and time. So I know that we appreciate that on that, and in reaching those youth and those that are at risk, but also seeing the strength in the youth in our community.
Thank you, Christy. I really appreciate that.
Not sure if Dr. Nelson may have gotten knocked off. What are some other ways that you guys can think of that we could entice young people to become involved in law enforcement? Because that is a challenge. And even Jakari is saying that it's not possible for him to do that alone. So from the panelists, what are, from your perception, are ways that they might better achieve that?
Do we have, and I just don't know. So again, covering multiple counties, we have a PAL, correct? Police athletically.
We have we have a police athletic league, but it's kind of changed. It's more of a tutoring, and
Okay.
then along with the tutoring, if we run across kids that can't afford to pay to play the sport,
Mhm.
if we can help them out in that regard, we help them out in that regard.
I was just wondering, due to my brother-in-law sheriff in Seminole County, but the boxing leagues through the PAL has been, for example, in Putnam County, a huge outreach and engagement, and seen a lot of at-risk kids that have just flourished and been able to travel around the state and gone to other parts of the country that just wouldn't have had that opportunity. And it's been a great outreach. So I was just curious if we, if we had a PAL and just that boxing component.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've spoken to Chief Capri about with the boxing specifically, because I know we have a local boxing gym right off of Speedway, and he was looking at coordinating with them to come up with a program. That's something we're looking at.
Deputy Chief, and I work at the health department here. And I'm born and raised, well, not born, but raised my entire life in Daytona Beach, and I've come back to work in the area. And I know that my career is much different than law enforcement, but I think that there are some opportunities to play up the benefits of being a young professional in Daytona Beach. Although obviously there's obvious challenges associated with being a law enforcement officer in your community. I think that young people oftentimes overlook the challenge with starting new careers in new places that you haven't lived and you don't have a network. When you think about cost of living and you say, oh, you get paid more there. So I think there's a way to maybe coordinate those recruitment efforts a little bit more when it comes to young professionals in our community in general. And for law enforcement, it'll be more specific, but I know for us, it's difficult because salaries may be lower or you're from the area. I know that there's also a stigma for people that have grown up here. If you come back to Daytona, it's because you didn't have a choice or you got to stay with your family. It's not because I like my community and I want, so I think there's some kind of rebranding that has to be done with the community before we can say, with law enforcement in particular, yes, I want to be a law enforcement officer here, especially as a 20-year-old,
Right. I would agree with that.
Excellent point, Ethan. I'm back in. I think it's twofold. With young folk, I think you have to start early. I think if we're waiting to middle and high school, we won't get there. This is starting early, and that's why I was mentioning about sometimes you'll see police twins and they're arresting the bad guy, but you have 10, 11, 8-year-old kids that see that. And while the police may be taking out the bad guy, if they don't find some way to wrap back around to community centers and other places that those kids can see law enforcement and a non-law enforcement light, it's going to be very difficult. So I think we have to be very strategic in our attempt to not only get the community buy-in, because as I said before, not often will you see in churches and other settings that Black folk in particular are saying we want our kids to be police officers. And a lot of that has to do with the history of policing. And a lot of it has to do with law enforcement just have to do a better job of selling themselves to the community. And the community has a responsibility as well, because you can't fault law enforcement for who they send to your community when you're not sending your best and brightest as well. So it's a delicate conversation, but a conversation that needs to be had.
Right. So two things I want to jump
Dr.
in.
Houston,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Two things real quick I want to jump in and add. I'm also interested to get to Dr. Youssef because she's making me nervous because she's been sitting there taking a whole lot of notes and she ain't said nothing yet. So I'm worried about what's coming. But anyway, one of my biggest frustrations with COVID right now is it has drastically hampered our ability to get out into the community. Because I agree with you, Doc. They can't see us when we're there solely making arrests. They gotta see us just when we're there just to engage. We gotta get back out there. We gotta start playing basketball. We gotta start playing dodgeball, whatever the case may be. So that's one of the thing that's bothering me most about where we're at right now with COVID is it's drastically hindered our ability to get out into the community. So I'm chomping at the bit. As soon as we get the all clear, we get some type of a vaccine in place or whatever needs to happen for us to be able to get back out there and engage. Because right now we're just very limited in our ability to do so. And then real quick, back to the recruitment side of things. And I think, like we talked about, it's kind of difficult when you have folks that have been here and have grown up here. And a lot of times it just boils down to they're just itching to experience a new area. They're just itching to just go somewhere else and get out of Daytona and experience a new area. So that's another thing where, like was just mentioned, we got to figure out some type of a campaign to really sell this department and the benefits of staying right here at home.
Yeah. Before Dr. Yusuf get into with her expertise in terms of policing and how we can get young people, one thing I do want to talk about is I'm working with Orlando Magic and the Jacksonville Jaguars now because, like I said, I still think you have to get younger. If you're waiting to 15, 16, 17, those kids, their minds already made up. The cop's the bad guy, and that's what it is. So I think we have to get younger, but I think having folk that go in and say, if you want to be the change you want to see, you have to be the change you want to see, and start it young. And that this is a profession that's worthy, and we need the most noble people. If you have this much authority at 21, 22 years of age, we need our best and our brightest. And that's the other thing. I think law enforcement is going to have to do a better job of weeding out those folk that don't represent themselves or the profession in a manner, because I think that does just as much damage to recruiting and the community trust. So, Dr. Hughes.
Thank you. And Deputy Chief Young, I was just taking notes for the action plan. So don't get nervous. Don't get too nervous. I echo what everyone's saying, that I think it has to occur at every stage. So in elementary schools, through the police athletic leagues, I think that the ways in which school resource officers interact with students while they're getting their education is going to have a huge impact at the middle and the junior high school level. I think that what Dr. Nelson was saying about the wraparound, like seeing officers in non-enforcement avenues, the research suggests that those are some of the most influential aspects of having particularly African-American males and females wanting to do, because a lot of individuals grow up with this sense of service and want to do work in their communities, but seeing that their family is going to be accepting of them being in law enforcement, their community is going to be seeing accepted, those are the hurdles that we have to overcome. But I think that as we have those personal touches with individuals, if people can relate to the police officer that was pleasant to them, that gave them a break or explained the situation, or I think that we are more likely, particularly with our students, to get other individuals involved in law enforcement. So I think it's just hitting it at every stage to overcome some of the historical mistrust and what historically these vicarious experiences that have been shared, particularly the negative ones amongst our communities about Black and brown, female and male interaction with police officers.
I would agree.
So can I jump in or no? Am I there? Okay. So hi,
Yes.
My name's Denise Vieira. I don't know most of you. I do live in Daytona. I am here as a private citizen, though my job is in this area, but it's in Washington. So, but I want to be very clear, I'm not here representing those people because that would get me in big trouble. I mean, not just being on the call, but the things that I'm going to say are, I just want to be very clear, are coming from me. With regard to the recruitment issue, I would echo what everyone's saying in terms of needing to look at a variety of different ages in terms of what the interactions are, and a variety of different kind of modalities. So yes, it's things like PAL. I don't know, and I'm really sorry that I know, some things about this and what we do across the country, and my specific knowledge of what goes on in Daytona is thin. Though I will say that the personal interactions that I've had with people from the police department here have been very positive. And as someone who works with a lot of police officers from around the country, frankly, I have had shockingly good experiences with some police officers here. And it's really just a matter of, like I said, I work with a lot of different police officers, and yet the individual like follow-up that people have done, that type of thing, I've been really, really impressed with. So I want to say that, and prefacing before I sort of thought, hey, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Are we doing the other? Because we may be doing all of them. I just don't know. But things like PAL, things like DEFY, which is for kids that are just a little bit older. That's a drug education for youth program, which is actually a Department of Navy program, but works with local police departments, where there's actually like a summer camp type thing that kids go to, and there's a variety of different activities, and there's a whole curriculum around that, is a way for kids to interact with police officers in a very personal kind of way, in the sense that you're spending every day with someone and you start to develop real relationships with them, because that's critical, that the relationships are real, not just I happen to see someone go by. Police explorers for when you get a little bit older, and the idea that now I'm kind of saying, well, could I be interested in this? I think are very specific programs that are out there. Dr. Youssef, what you were saying about this sort of culturally, I think is really important too. If we don't remember the issues of trauma and community level trauma and vicarious trauma and how that's impacting people, and the idea that you're going to look at a police department maybe negatively, and it's not just this police department, it's police generally. So if you have a cousin who lives in a completely different city and they had a bad experience with police, that is very likely influencing your view of the police. So that is something that we're going to kind of have to battle. And one of the challenges I would put to specifically the Daytona police, but also the Volusia County Sheriff, is that I think these are pretty progressive police departments, but it's also moving your colleagues across the state and across the nation. Because as long as people view, and particularly within the Black community, view police negatively, it's going to be hard to recruit people to be this thing that is viewed as negative. I think there's another local culture thing that can go on, which is the extent that we're very clear that our police are servants, sort of the servant mentality versus the warrior mentality. And so that, that kind of gets to some of what I think, Christy, you were saying about having that presence in the community and people always feeling like the police are partners and things. And I think some of that goes on, but just really constantly having that attitude, which then also connects to the whole idea of procedural justice. And I'd say, Dr. Youssef, I think you're the person who also kind of alluded to this when you said, do people feel like they understand what was going on? So the sort of, core principles there of people feeling like they have voice, and that they feel like there's transparency, that there's fairness, that there's neutrality, right? That you don't treat me differently than you would treat other people. So that's something that I think getting that message out that that our police forces are those type of police forces is really critical. And then I can't remember who's, it must have been you, Dr. Nelson, who said this. What you were talking about people from Bethune, and how, the idea of recruiting from Bethune, but I think part of this is also recruiting to Bethune, right? It's one thing to say I've already studied criminal justice there, right? Like you were saying at WG, it's like, yeah, I studied there and then I stayed, but you had already come to Bethune and got into a criminal justice program. So some of it is, how do we get people to come to Bethune and be in the criminal justice program? Because those then are people that we may be more likely to be able to get to stay here. So anyway, that's, I can go on and on and on, and I'll stop, but those are the things I have to say on recruiting.
Excellent. Now that's, I think that's the core of the conversation we have to have. And the other thing, we're talking about law enforcement, but I also think we need to flip to the community side in terms of how do we get the community to say, being a part of the change you want to see, getting young folk to come in, young homegrown folk to come in and be a part of this agency, being deputy chief, being the chief. How do we have those conversations with the community and be intentional?
Well, one thing, we try to the
initiative, but I'm muted.
It's Judge Schuman.
Not muted.
So with regard to that, we try to never miss an opportunity. When we have monthly community meetings all over the city in various neighborhoods throughout the city. And when we go to these community meetings, we try to take the opportunity to promote certain programs that we have. Like we run a Citizens Police Academy that will allow citizens to come in and see how we train. They get to see the different divisions throughout the police department. We also have something that's called our Citizens on Patrol program that's been in place since 1997. But the one thing that I'm still trying to figure out is we don't have any Black participants in that Citizens on Patrol program. So you say it all the time, Doc, when you talk about accountability has to be a two-way street. So if there's a questionable shooting or a questionable use of force, the mayor's phone is going to blow off the hook with folks wanting to hold us accountable, wanting to be a part of a citizens review board, because everybody's about holding the police accountable, but I can't get that same energy from the community, especially in the African-American community, that help us out on the front end as far as helping police the community. I'm not talking about having folks respond to a shots fired call or anything where their life is going to be placed in danger. That's a huge liability. That's not what I'm talking about. But like with our current program, you know, they help us patrol shopping centers. If they go by a building and the building is obviously vacant and it's marked no trespassing, and you got several folks hanging out in front of the business, they can get on the radio and they can call us over to respond. Hey, listen, you have some trespassers over here. There's a traffic crash over here, things of that nature. I'm not talking about putting people in harm's way, but when I present this to, let's say, my Midtown community, I'm not getting very much buy-in. So it's the same thing with our police explorers. We have a police explorer program. I don't have any young African-American males, or well, I think that's wrong. I think I have maybe 3 that are in that police explorer program. And when I go and talk to young people about joining the police explorer program, a lot of them laugh at me, just to be honest. Right. They laugh at me. It's like, that's not even, they won't even fathom the thought of being a police explorer, at least in front of their peers. So now sometimes we can work behind the scenes and get them one-on-one and maybe convince them that, hey, this is a good thing for you. But, you know, we're just really fighting that stigma behind being in law enforcement and being in police. So when you talk about recruitment as a whole, especially right now, like a couple months removed from what took place in Minneapolis, it's extremely difficult right now. Like that was a huge setback for all of us.
Right. And it was difficult before then. This is a conversation I have. It was difficult before then. So even with Citizen Patrol and every law enforcement agency I've trained and traveled through from Florida to California say the exact same thing that you said about Now, the trick was that with Bethune-Cookman University, we went over to Jacksonville and we had probably up to 50, 60, 70 individuals that went in and did simulators, but they wouldn't go for JSO. That's what I mean about evolving, that we have to get from the cell phone in the bag to cell phone in the pump. We have to be very, very smart and intentional on how we go about it, because no, they won't go to the Citizen Academy if Daytona Beach is asking, but they will. And one of the things I have to commend Sheriff Chitwood, they donated a simulator to us, and that simulator will allow us to get more African-American folk coming in and experiencing the perspective of law enforcement. And sometimes you have to use someone else to get the message for you. And I think that that's one of the conversations, even with recruiting. There's some things that Daytona Beach and other law enforcement agents can't do. I think building relationships and having other as proxy within the community, whether it's a church, whether it's a university, institution, to be able to do that. So that's part of that conversation. And until that trust is there, it's going to be very difficult to do a lot of the things that we're talking about.
Right.
And I mean, going back to one of our earlier meetings that we had and panels that we had today, talking about communities and feeling safe, thinking about, for example, the kids, the police explore, how, if parents don't have transportation, how are they going to be able to pick them up? How are they going to be able to bring them there? How is someone going to be able to, if the child has to walk home after that, how are they going to get home? How are they going to be safe? So some of it's, we do have to talk about basic, people meeting their basic needs and basic safety. A kid's not going to think about joining police explorers if, I'm hungry all day. Like, all I'm thinking about is where I'm going to eat my next meal. Don't ask me, I got to do school. I have to do everything else. I can't even have my basic needs met. Don't ask me to do anything else.
It's a good point, Chris. And that, I think that goes back to the picture. If you go back to that equality versus equity picture, I think, and I'm glad you brought that up, because some things we don't even think in terms of those things. We'll just say that it's because of this, because that the community doesn't like law enforcement. But there are a whole host of things that prevent particularly kids in disadvantaged communities from being able to access anything. And if we were to be true to ourselves, 99.9% of the low performing schools are in these communities. Food, there's a lot of other things that are going on before you the police. So all of these things merge together when we're trying to have these conversations. But if we keep our eye on that equity, equality, I think that those are issues that, and I'm glad you brought it up, because those are issues that goes into recruitment and the trust between law enforcement as well.
Well, as I say too, Derbyshire Place is one of our church ministries. And they did, last year was the first year that they did Halloween candy giveaway. And Miguel that was there asked, about candy giveaway. And the kids were like, we don't go out trick or treating. We don't feel safe. He's like, okay, you're going to have a safe place. We're going to do trunk or treat this year. So again, that was that community getting out to solve that problem. But again, it wasn't until the conversation with the kids, they're like, I don't feel safe going out and trick or treating at night.
Okay.
And along the lines of equity and what Christy was just saying earlier, I think it's important too to start addressing some of those issues, or continue to address some of those issues that allow like crime to thrive. So like when you're in an area that has poor lighting, broken windows with broken window theory, abandoned homes, cars on the side of the road that are never locked, these are areas that are prone to crime. And then if I'm a young kid who is in close proximity to crime all my life, of course I may never commit a crime, but my cousin did, my brother did, so I have a bad taste in my mouth in terms of policing. So it's kind of, you're already setting these kids are already set up for a disadvantage just because of their proximity to crime, because they live in neighborhoods that predispose them to that. So I think that it's kind of hard to have this conversation if we're not talking about the built environment. And I know someone mentioned Midtown in particular, so we know there's all this history associated with this area in particular neighborhoods and down South Street, and we know, well, a lot of us know what that is like at night walking down those areas. So if you're a kid growing up there, you're going to be hard pressed to be recruited to the Daytona Police Department because of how you've experienced the police in that neighborhood.
Right. And it's not just the police. I mean, those structural inequities that are historical, your chance of graduating from high school, all of those things are built in. So the fact that kids that actually come out of those situations and thrive, so the resilience that they have. But imagine if we could live up to the equity picture and give them even better a better chance, because it's not lost on us that zip codes determine are a very, very, very accurate predictor of folks' life choices and chances. Zip codes, not their talent, not but their zip code and where they live. So some of those structural things. So with that, I think that's a good transition, and we've gone from police in the community. The next step is after someone is arrested and they're into the system. So you're talking about the type of charge, what you're going to charge, who's going to represent them. I think we go to that conversation now. So Is anyone else have anything that we need to document going from the police community before we go into the next stage of after someone is actually arrested? Anyone have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say that that's a broken windows theory, a lot like stop and frisk has been debunked. It doesn't work. It's kind of just not true. Though I do agree with what you're saying, Mr. Johnson, right, gentleman from the health department, with regard to things like the built environment. So doing crime prevention through environmental design actually is very effective. If you have certain kinds of places that aren't well lit, or there's little corners where someone can hang out in, that definitely is a problem. But that's really very specific to how the kind of built environment is. You have kind of weird barriers and things like that. What has really been shown to make a huge in terms of lowering crime, though, is the level of collective efficacy. And without getting too wonky here, I know we got several wonks on the nerds on this call, so shout out to all my nerd friends. But the idea of collective efficacy, meaning the level that within the community people feel like they can, not just individually, but collectively be effective in making change. And that's not just in one area. Like, I feel like I have influence over the police, but I generally have influence in my community. And that has been shown to have significantly better outcomes with regard to crime prevention, but also health, education, a variety of other things that your initiative is talking about. So
right.
The extent that we can, and I think this again all kind of wraps back to the idea of procedural justice too, is one thing that can help feed that. But I'm always going, kind of going there like, yeah, broken windows theory. So.
Yeah, I just want to add, and I think that we can see those things in tandem. Broken windows is definitely flawed in terms of, because of the level of complaints, the way in which the policing conducted those social,
Right.
social physical disorder crimes. But if you think about what you said about collective efficacy, like the willingness to intervene and the trust that neighbors have amongst each other, if we there can be things that facilitate that among community members to regulate who's loitering on the street, without a criminal justice response. And so,
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying and what Mr. Johnson is saying is that they kind of can be used in tandem if it's not seen as the arm of the police, if it's just seen as we're empowering communities to have more collective efficacy. And we can use, and then the crime prevention through environmental design, I think that even that's some of what, we in neighborhoods saying, okay, trim your bushes or have more lights, or, it doesn't have to be just from a law enforcement perspective. And I think that, some of those conversations that are coming as a result of Black Lives Matter and all of these other discussions is funding communities to take part in some of these things, as opposed to just relying on law enforcement, because the over-reliance on law enforcement can cause, some of these other problems, like the increased complaints and, some of the outcomes of stop and frisk where there was, actually nothing was a result from those stop and frisk. So I just wanted, but yeah, thank you for that comment. I think that what you were saying could be seen, collectively as a strength for how we can move forward in Daytona.
Yeah, I want to jump in and say thank you for that comment on collective efficacy, because I think at the end of the day, it's the most important thing that we can have in all of these sessions. As an educator, we acknowledge collective efficacy as the single greatest determinant in whether we can turn a student around. And it's certainly the same in every other, component that we're working with. So I think it's something that bears revisiting, and it also is something that is that we should almost sort of try to center our future efforts around that. We used different language this morning in another session, but it was the same intent. So if at the end of the day, if we can get that, collective efficacy to believe in our community and to be engaged and to be all intentional, we're going to make some progress. So thank you for bringing that up, and I'll close.
Okay, I'm going to go full on wonk here then and say,
we can't hear you.
the bridging type of social capital, because everybody on this, who's on this call, I mean, to the extent that we are connecting our networks with the networks of, like, some of these kids were saying, well, they may not, Chris, you were saying, you know, they may not have a ride somewhere. So just the idea of adding that in, I think, to this whole thing, kind of an overarching level as well, is just the idea of what social capital is there in the community and how can we expand that and bridge that, because this isn't an initiative about how much money can we throw at things, but that is something that doesn't have to cost money.
Right. All right.
No, shut up.
Can I jump in real quick before we segue?
Yes.
So just a couple things, because we talked a little bit about CPTED. We talked about crime prevention by environmental design, but it didn't sound like we were necessarily making that a policing issue. I'm not sure if that's where we were going with that, but I just want to put it out there that we do have CPTED certified officers here, and that is a service that we provide. We will go to certain neighborhoods and apartment complexes, and we will provide that service. We will go ahead and conduct that study to, you know, just show people what they can do as far as, you know, better lighting here, cut these trees back, cut these bushes back, things of that nature to, you know, help, you know, better police the area or make it less accessible to crime. So we do provide that service here. And when you going back to the broken windows theory, whatnot, a lot of that falls under code enforcement, and code enforcement also is aligned under the police department. So we try to work hand in hand when we see things like that, because most of those things are going to be code violations. So because they fall underneath the police department, we strategize and we do our best to hold property owners accountable for just making sure their properties are kept up, you know, to the best of their ability. And then the last thing, I think it was both Ethan and Denise referenced PAL. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least go back, and this solely falls on the sheriff, because obviously everybody knows he was the chief here before he became the sheriff, and he was a visionary in this regard. When we looked at PAL in its historic form, which all centers around sports, he identified a problem. A lot of the kids that we were running across that were getting in trouble in school, committing crime outside of school, when we started looking at putting them in the PAL, he discovered that a lot of them either couldn't read or were reading on a level, several grades lower than the grade that they're in. So he made that call several years ago where he said, look, sports is great, but if you can't read, I'm gonna be dealing with you until you're an adult. So I would rather put a tutoring program in place and some after school programs in place to help you academically and help you get up to speed as far as your reading level. And then if you still want to play sports, we have the funds to assist you in playing sports. But he chose to put the priority on the reading, because that was one thing that jumped out to him was, hey, look, yeah, we can dribble a basketball with these kids all day long, but if they can't read, or if they're reading drastically below their age level, we're gonna be dealing with these kids until they're adults. And that was the vision for us going the way we went with our PAL program.
Okay. Excellent. Before we transition, is one, and we're going to keep saying one thing with the CPTED thing. It's once again, that's the evolving thing. Is there any way, Chief Young, that you guys can train people within the community to be able to do that? Because I still think you teach a man how to fish, you can continue, as opposed to police going out there and doing. So train folk in the community, whether it's Bethune-Cookman University, a church, someone at church, but that they can learn that and go out and teach it to the community.
I think absolutely. I don't know as far as getting folks an actual certification. I don't know if we can go that far to get to allow them to be actually certified in that. But I really believe that that's the goal when we go out and we conduct these CPTED studies, is so that those that have called upon us to conduct a study in the future, they can be able to look at those things and evaluate those things themselves. So it's kind of one of those things that as we're conducting the study, we're also training them that these are the things you should look for, because in the future, the bushes are going to grow back again, the lights are going to go out again, the trees are going to be overgrown again. So this is what we look at to help keep you safe. So in the future, these are the things you can stay on top of.
All right, well, we can put that down, because I actually, in Orlando, I worked with them. They actually got some community folk certified. So, and it was the first time that they've ever done it. But that's the type of out of the box thinking that I think that we have to think of. How can we get folk in the community to learn and be the ones? Because even with the simulator, I know once our simulator is on campus that we're gonna have far more community folk coming in using our simulator on policing than you would ever get to go to a citizen academy. And that's just the nature. Until we can get beyond the trust issue, I think we're gonna have to build it that way.
Right. I wasn't aware of that, so we definitely need to talk offline in reference to that certification.
Perfect. So a good transition into, so we're in the criminal justice system. Law enforcement is the first entry, the first level. So they come in law enforcement, the rest is made. Now, after the rest is made, there are charges. You got state attorney, public defender. Can we have some, I would love anyone from both of those agents to have a conversation about, and once again, we're referring it back to the equality versus equity picture that the mayor presented at the front end. What are some of the things that we can do within those systems after the rest has been made? From that point forward, I think that's where the conversation and the dialogue will go now.
I'm on the phone. This is Jim Purdy, the public defender, and I believe John Reed from the state attorney's office is also on this program today. Are you there, John?
Yes, I see John.
Good to talk to you. I'd like to just make a couple of notes, if I could. You talk about having the police athletic league working with the kids coming up. But one thing that can undo 10 years of good work is one police stop for rolling through a stop sign and not coming to a complete stop. And the resulting interaction between a police officer and the person driving the car, who then has a request to search the car by the police officer, which may be refused. And so they may bring a police dog out to walk around the car and do a sniff around there. And somebody that was maybe on their way to work, on their way to the grocery store, all of a sudden ends up with a 30-minute interlude in their lives. And frankly, I'll tell you, I live in Port Orange. And if we had stops like that, of the people that live in Port Orange, the police chief's head would be on a platter. But these are and a lot of times these stops show nothing. And so it's just a bad police experience for a stop that in other, what they don't call high crime areas would not even occur. And so I would ask that one of the things the police departments may want to look at is these minor stops being used as a pretext, even though they're a legal stop, because somebody just rolls through a stop. If you don't come to a complete stop, it's a valid stop. If you change lanes driving down the highway or down the road without using your turn arrow to change lanes, it's probably a valid stop. But is it something that can cause more problems than cause good? My son-in-law, my former son-in-law, is an African American, and he worked for a bank in Oklahoma and went to a seminar in Texas, rented a car when he got off the airplane to go to a banking seminar, and got stopped by a deputy because he was a black man driving a rental car. These are the types of things that we see that don't necessarily result in arrests that come into the criminal justice system, but that can definitely taint the opinion of people about their law enforcement. And I'd like to, just start out with that aspect. The other issue that I would like to see in the community is jury service. If you want to have equity in the criminal justice system, when you have a young black man that has been arrested and wants to go to trial, and he walks into that courtroom because he's professing his innocence, and they bring in a jury pool of 20 jurors, and maybe one of them is black, that's not what he considers a jury of his peers. And they may have sent out 200 jury summonses that day or more to have people come in for jury service. And they send them out to all the communities. They send them out to all the zip codes. It's based upon driver's licenses now. The most important thing that I think that we can do in the African American community and in the churches in the African American community is to promote the concept of having people come to jury service when they receive a jury summons, period. If there's that leveling of the field right there on the spot, where someone believes they're getting a fair trial because the people that are the jury are a jury of their peers, that can go a long way towards establishing the equity that you're talking about. That being said, I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Well, can I jump in?
Excellent.
About the traffic
Go
stop?
ahead.
So real quick,
Go ahead.
Mr. Purdy, I think, Mr. Purdy, I agree with what you're saying in reference to these trivial traffic stops where maybe someone doesn't stop on the stop bar and they're now in a 30-minute encounter with the police. What you have to realize or take into account is how many of the complaints that we are receiving from the community in these neighborhoods where these stops are being conducted. A lot of times when we're making stops like that, it's in response to community complaints about folks running those stop signs. So the approach that we encourage is education over enforcement, because they're right to make the stop, but it shouldn't cost you a $167 ticket because your front two tires were past that stop bar. But if we're constantly being faced with multiple complaints in a certain area about speeding and folks running the stop sign, there's a potential that we're going to take that type of enforcement or conduct those type of stops. But
Yeah,
again, this is education over enforcement.
And that's something I don't disagree with at all. But when that particular stop turns into a search, where there's a request to search the car, you've gone beyond what the whole purpose of having that community service was for. It's to walk up to the window of the car, tell the driver, look, you didn't come to a complete stop at the stoplight or the stop sign. The law requires it. Have a good day. We're watching. But when he says, can I search your car? And if he doesn't get the permission to search, he's sitting there writing a ticket for 10 minutes while they wait for the dog to show up. These are the things that I'm concerned about, because that's what taints the community aspect, in my opinion. You can undo, like I said, 10 years of good work with somebody in the police athletic league if he's stopped 2 or 3 times from the time he's 16 to the time he's 19 and put through these types of traumas. That's all I'm saying.
No, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's a part. When you were talking, I wrote down 2 things. One, I wrote police accountability on that one, because I think that there needs to be, whether it's Dr. Yusuf, whether it's Bethune Community, I do think that you have to have folks that are reviewing that type of data. How many stops, how many searches? I think that holds police accountable. And I think that you have, because you have a lot of goodwill police officers, but you have others that exactly what you said, and I've seen it across the country. So no, that data needs to be available. Folk need to look at that data, and that helps law enforcement get better. The next thing you talk about jury service, I put community accountability, because absolutely, that's the same way that I'm talking about police recruitment. That same conversation in churches and communities about going and being the change you want to see. That same conversation about jury duty and the port of voting and everything else, because all of that goes into the conversation we're having. So no, I agree with you. It's police accountability. It's 2-way accountability. You won't get get beyond that. It's both police and community. And what we tend to do is we try to defend, whether it's defending why folk don't register for jury duty or defend type of stops. There, if you have an independent person looking at both, and we're trying to get better, I don't think it's out the way. I think it's a legitimate place to have conversation and discussion. So thank you for both of your points. So we move over to the state attorney. So we have the public defender, the issues that you brought forth to the group. Mr. State Attorney, is there any precedent? And once again, we're still going back to the equality versus equity, well, relative to the criminal justice system. And I know we're trying to keep it confined and it's a lot bigger, but are there any salient points that you have that you would add to this discussion?
But I agree that we can look at new ways of enforcing law and enforcing crime when the cases come to us. And we've been doing a lot of that. We've been looking at diversions because, I mean, I've been doing this my entire career, and I think you can see there are some very serious cases that come before us, and there's some people who can be rehabilitated in the community. Some of the areas I think would highlight is we've been trying to work with the local community leaders as well as law enforcement to come up with some new innovative ideas. There was an article in the paper today about civil citations that we're doing with juveniles that I think is a great thing that we've worked with local law enforcement, both Sheriff Chitwood and then Chief Capri, and then obviously Jakari Young have been a big help with that. And I think that's different ideas like that is going to help a lot as well. Like with the civil citations that we've done, it's given law enforcement a tool where with juveniles, you can prevent a criminal record. And I think with what Jim Purdy was talking about was hopefully you can prevent a bad contact with law enforcement, where when juveniles do something they shouldn't do, it gives law enforcement an opportunity to still make sure the juvenile is aware that they shouldn't do that, but not have a criminal record. So they can have an alternative sanction. So the state attorney's office will never see the case. It'll go to Department of Juvenile Justice. They can come up with whatever education or sanctions they think is appropriate. And there's never any criminal record whatsoever because it never comes to the state attorney's office. One of the things that another thing that we've partnered with law enforcement recently to do is for non-arrest cases. As a lot of y'all might know, if law enforcement does a notice to appear for a juvenile in the past, it would go to the clerk's office and then come to the state. We review it. If we decided not to file it, there's still a record of an arrest of that juvenile. With our partnership with law enforcement, the law enforcement's agreed to send those arrests directly to the state attorney's office. And if we don't file a charge, it goes away and there's no record whatsoever. So we're trying to do things like that, especially on the lower nonviolent crimes, to make it so people aren't having that bad contact with state attorney's office, bad contact with law enforcement, giving law enforcement additional tools. We've also have done a tremendous amount of different diversion programs to help try to rehabilitate rather than just incarcerate individuals. The problem with, I think, as everyone knows, with those kind of things, they can be expensive. And right now there's a lot of budgetary issues with the state, but we're always working on new ideas. I've been meeting with some of the captains and with Jakari's help over at Daytona Beach Police Department to try to come up with an additional diversion programs to help with some of the issues that Daytona Beach is facing, with mental health issues as well as substance abuse issues. So I think that kind of those alternative prosecution programs are very valuable and be very helpful in our community. And I think that those are a big tool in the process.
Perfect. Thank you. I would like to ask you with regards to community engagement. We took in terms of law enforcement, but I also think that there needs to be some type of interface in terms of community engagement for both the public defender's office and the state attorney's office, and particularly in those communities that are most distrustful of the criminal justice system. Whether we need to facilitate that through Cook University? Or you guys do it through various sections of Volusia County? What are you doing, and how can we work together? That interface, even if it's educating.
Well, let me just say that, boy, oh boy, we got some feedback here. I have a very good working relationship with R.J. LaRusso, the state attorney. And we've worked together for several years to come up with these specialty courts that help mental health issues, that help with DUI issues, that help with the veterans court. So we're always open. I don't know. Did I hear that Judge Schuman is on the phone?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Because Judge Schuman has gone a long way in promoting these particular courts. I'd like to turn it over to her to speak.
I think if anybody can mute their microphones, we're getting a bunch of feedback.
Yeah. Hey, Judge, you can try now. Unmute, Judge. Can you unmute yourself? Judge, are you muted? Yeah, it's on the screen. It's like a microphone look. It may be red. It may be red, and once you click on it, it'll turn green.
Can the moderator unmute her?
There we go.
David, oh, there you
Can
go.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for convening this equity initiative, Mayor. I appreciate that. Like Ms. Vieira, I would like to say at the outset that I do not speak for the criminal justice system. I speak for myself, and that's all, and that's plenty for most days. For those, I know a lot of people on this call, but for those of you who don't know me, I've been a county judge here in Volusia County for the past 15 years. Prior to that, I worked for the Attorney General's office representing the state in criminal appeals for over 20 years. I also taught police recruit training for about 10 years. So my entire professional career has been in the criminal justice field. I agree with the things that Mr. Purdy and Mr. Reed have already said. Jury summons is a very important factor. We have to summon 3 times as many people as we need in a jury pool. So that means for every 3 people that you send summons to, only 1 shows up. And they're taken from driver's licenses, so it's not voter anymore. It's from the driver's license. It's been that way for many, many years. So I also agree that the civil citations for juveniles is a wonderful program. I would say that courts are reactive. We're not proactive when it comes to criminal justice. We don't have any say-so in the number of cases that are filed, the number of cases that are sent to us. You know, we're reactive in the sense of bringing cases into the justice system. Mr. Purdy's right. We have started in our circuit several diversion programs that are very successful. DUI court, mental health diversion programs for people who find themselves caught up in the criminal justice system as part of mental health, and other specialty courts as well. Veterans court, we're very active with that. I would also say that, you know, we can always improve, always, and I'm pleased to be part of a discussion like this. But equity and training on cultural diversity and implicit bias is a mandatory part of judicial training. Every year when we go to conference, and it's part of the initial judge school as well, to receive training for those sort of things. And so I think that that is extremely important. But for myself, what I try and do is explain the process in a way that people can understand. Explain why an offer may be different. Explain why two people with the same charge, one may have the case reduced or dismissed and the other one does not. And try and point out to people, you know, in real time, what the process is all about or why the offers are different. Try to treat people with respect and empathy. And I think that those are all things that we can do to advance equity and advance fairness, which is really what courts are all about. That's what we strive every day, to be fair, impartial, and adjudicate the cases that are brought before us. I would say recently there was an article in the News Journal about FDLE is putting together a database. It's somewhat overdue, but they're putting together a database to track the number of people charged with crimes, their ethnicity, and also, you know, by race and category, and what happens to the different charges. I think when that becomes online, whenever that may be, it will be helpful in gathering raw data about the justice system. But I don't believe that, you know, that we have a lot that we can do as far as cases coming into the system. That's really a function of the police. But all the things that Mr. Purdy and Mr. Reed have discussed here today are ways that we try to deal with equity in the court system.
Thank you, Judge. And I have a couple of additional questions. You brought up about the FDLE database, and yeah, it's woefully behind.
Yes, it is.
There's a study that came out that looked at judges sentencing among judges a couple of years ago, and it talked about differences based on political affiliation, difference based on male and female judges, differences based on race, different types. So I'm glad to hear about the bias training, because we all have them. When someone tells you that they don't have bias, you look at them with a jaundiced eye, because we all have them. The trick, particularly when you're in a position of authority, whether it's law enforcement, a judge, a state attorney, or a public defender, is recognizing those biases and not letting them affect or impact your actions. So when you have situations, whether it's a law enforcement arrest that you have questions with, how do you, as an individual judge, how do you deal with situations like that when you see there is an issue of equity within the system itself with one of the stakeholders that you work with? How do you handle something? Because I'm sure that that's something the community would want to know. How do you personally handle those?
One of the things about being a county judge is that I am fortunate to have people from the public defender's office and the state attorney's office who are just beginning their careers. And so these are people who are right out of law school, generally speaking, who this is the first job they've had as a lawyer. And so how do I deal with those issues? I call them to the bench. I say, hey, have you looked at that police report? You know, seems like you point out legal issues that you may see, and so that they can become educated on how cases could be handled in a more fair manner. And that's really, I would say, across the board. I don't see that as something that is specific to a particular part of town.
Okay.
So I think it's a question of education for younger lawyers. And I know that Mr. Purdy and Mr. Reed are constantly engaged in training, and I'll let them speak to that. They do an excellent job of preparing people to come to court. I'm certainly not implying otherwise. I'm just saying that, you know, there are some charges that I look at that when I'm at the jail, evaluating whether there's been probable cause to arrest someone. Those are things like resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, failure to give a name. You know, there are some charges that are, you know, disorderly conduct, which is essentially breach of the peace. Those are things that, you know, you might want to look more carefully at to make sure that you know, there is probable cause. Now, most people in my experience, and I know that Jakari Young can speak about this, but most people with those lower level charges pretty much demand that they get arrested, in my view. I mean, in other words, their actions are, I mean, often the police start with a more de-escalated approach. The person won't pay attention and they say, look, just walk away or I'm going to arrest you. That doesn't happen, and so it's fairly predictable. So I'm not casting aspersions on the police, but there are some charges that are kind of, I guess, catch-all charges that would cause us to look a little more askance. And I know Mr. Purdy may have some input on that since he was kind enough to throw it to me. I'll throw it back to him.
Good one.
Well, thank you very much, Judge. I appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's no two ways about it that we have a lot of minor crimes that end up, particularly in county court, in misdemeanor court, where Judge Schuman is basically the guru to go, the go-to person, because she has had that background with the Attorney General's office and does a great job of helping to train our young attorneys. And this is a training issue that we have for our attorneys. I don't know if you can see me on here, but I've had to move my chair around because my iPad is telling me I was down to 10%. And I was afraid I was going to lose the connection, so I had to come over here and get close enough to an electric plug. So I've changed my aspect here in my den here at the house. But as far as we have a lot of young attorneys coming up, and we have a supervisor in Daytona, Siobhan McCants, who happens to be an African American, and she is our division chief for the misdemeanor division to help train these attorneys. And she has done a great job over the past year or two that she's been the division chief in our misdemeanor division. We try to train them up in misdemeanor, learn how to try cases, learn how to negotiate cases, and then as time progresses and older attorneys leave the office, either through retirement or through going out into private practice, we move them up to the felony division. Hopefully by the time they go up, they have had the experience that they need and have the tools that they will need to go forward with representing our clients in the felony division. We do have training sessions for them. Every year, the Florida Public Defender Association puts on 2 different seminars, one in the summer for training attorneys and one in the winter for training attorneys. Plus, we have what we call Defender College twice a year for the young attorneys to teach them how to try cases. So training is a big aspect of the job that we have. But there's nothing that beats the practical experience of going through. I started out my career as a prosecutor. I started out with the Attorney General's office like Judge Schuman was for 2.5 years, then became a prosecutor for 12 years, and then went out into private practice before getting elected public defender, which I've been PD in our circuit for the last 16 years, and I'll retire at the end of the year. So we'll be handing the mantle over to somebody else at the end of December. The election's coming up in August, by the way. Be sure you get out and vote. But other than that, the one important thing that I think as far as equity is concerned, I just can't stress this enough, is the community outreach to try to get jurors to come in, to try to get people to obey the jury summonses, take the time out of their day or out of their week to come down and serve the community. Because I don't think there's any better thing that can be done to ensure equity and to ensure justice in the criminal justice system than having a jury of the defendant's peers, because that's when they know that they're getting a fair shake. But I'll just leave it at that and pass it on to the next person.
Before we go back to the state attorney, I think that when we having this conversation about equity and education, even with jury duty, you have folk, particularly poor folk, that don't know that they think if I go to jury duty, I won't get paid today. So I think a lot of that is educating both the community, but employers and everything else, because if it's a choice between me going to serve as a jury duty or lose 8 hours of my check, those are conversations I think speaks to the equity, and equity is just, to me, is equity in terms of education and information. So I don't think it's always an issue of race in and of itself. I think sometimes it's resources, it's everything else that's built into that. And we need to make sure that when we're talking equity, we're inclusive, just like Christy brought up about the young folk that don't have money to go to the Explorers. All of those things contribute to the bigger picture that we need to talk about when we're talking about equity. The other thing that you mentioned, Mr. Purdy, I think law enforcement, just everyone does training, and we'll all say we do. All training isn't the same training. I think Denise mentioned earlier about procedural justice, and procedural justice speak to voice, fairness, impartiality, and transparency. I think that even if we're training a law enforcement officer for the first year or a first year state attorney, I think the training has to be, even when we talk about diversity, I think it has to be applied training. How do I use this in my job? How does this affect me in my job? A lot of training, we'll put them in a room and just do training. We have to do more applied training that is specific to a job task and what it is, whether it's reviewing and determining what charges they're going to file on someone, the public defender reviewing and determining how to go about a case, a judge reviewing it. I think how is it applied, and particularly in the context of equity as well. Not only, I think a lot of folk, when they think about equity, they think about racial equity. And I do think that that's a part of the pie, but there are a lot of other structural things that are built in that leads to folk not showing up for jury duty and some of the other things. And how can we that collective efficacy? I think that's a part of that conversation. So thank the both of you for your insight, and I think it helps with the bigger discussion. State Attorney Reed, getting back to the same conversation within your office and the platform that you have, how do you address issues that come to you, whether it's racial equity or lack of resources? How do you address those issues in both a learning format, but also to the betterment of the system? Because sometimes we'll try to keep or address things in a silo, and I think it prevents us from learning within the broader structure of the system itself. So that would be, and I know you will come across some difficult things as state, what to charge on, when to charge, so on and so forth. But when you see things that are a question of equity, how do you go about addressing that? And then how can what you've learned and how you apply be applied to the larger structure for educational purposes?
I agree with you. I think that training is an extremely important part of it, and that's something we want to make sure we focus on with our prosecutors. We do have extensive training for our prosecutors. They obviously start on the lower level cases with the misdemeanors, but we don't just throw anybody to the wolves. I mean, there's mandatory training that they have to, and I'm certainly don't mean that any slight, but there's mandatory training they have to do. We've created all kinds of other educational training programs. RJ started a prosecutors college that's a statewide college that they go to that is held yearly in Ocala for new attorneys for additional training. All of our attorneys, they have docket partners that are more experienced attorneys that will assist them with it. And then we have managers as well. And one of the things that we really focus on, I personally talk to every prosecutor before we let them do anything and go over some of the basics. And we emphasize that you cannot make any decision based on someone's race, ethnicity, anything like that. I mean, there's zero tolerance to that. You do that, you're out of here. I mean, it's not back to training, they're fired. I mean, that there's zero tolerance with that. But how do you make sure they do that? And that goes back to the training on how do you make an offer? How do you make a filing decision? That type of thing. And we go through with them. You have to look at the aggravators and the mitigators and weigh those and making that decision. And we talk to them about what are the aggravators you look at? What are the mitigators you look at? And a lot of times with the mitigators, we might not be privy to all that information because, you know, we can't talk to the defendant, but we encourage our attorneys to reach out to the defense attorney. What are all the mitigators? I mean, right before we got on this call, I was talking to a defense attorney where the client was a veteran, but I didn't have any information about him. So I, you know, said, bring me all this. I want to know all this before I don't even ask me to make a plea offer before you bring me everything. I want to know the good about your client. And we encourage that from our people. And we work with the community for as well. Like we work with law enforcement extensively. We have intake attorneys that are paired up with a particular law enforcement agency. Like for Daytona Beach, we have 2 intake attorneys that they intake all of Daytona's cases. They go to meetings with Daytona. They go to the meetings where they talk about the cases that they're investigating. And, you know, we have our attorneys embedded with the law enforcement agencies to talk through the cases, to work through the cases. Obviously, we have a management tier structured as well. So if any private attorney believes that, or our public defender believes that someone's being treated inappropriately, or just a prosecutor's being too harsh, they can go up the ladder to more experienced attorneys. And we obviously have our most experienced attorneys handle the more serious crimes. The other thing that I think, you know, going back to what we talked about before, that's extremely useful that we've in our circuit have really broadened are these alternative prosecution sentencing, like the civil citation, which, I mean, that takes it completely out of the state's hand, and we were all for it. But having programs that will rehabilitate and not just incarcerate. I think most people would agree that putting someone in jail for 60 days doesn't really make the community that much safer. I mean, there's some people that, you know, look, you got to smack them on the hand. But most people, you know, would benefit much more from drug treatment, mental health treatment, you know, veterans court. And RJ has been a huge supporter of them. And, you know, the judges have worked well with us, both defender's office has worked well with us. Since I've been in this position, I've increased, you know, I've pushed those programs extensively. I've told our, you know, our prosecutors, I tell them, you review your cases. And if there's someone who's a real danger to the community, because that's part of our job, those are the cases we want to focus a good chunk of our resources on. The other people, let's try to get them back into the community, get them back to being productive members of society. If there's a program that we can get them in to help them, that's where we need to be putting them. And we've increased the numbers quite a bit in our veterans program, in our DUI court programs, and our drug court programs. I mean, at the state, we've all the drug programs, for instance, we put together, we call it our STEP program. And I think there's 18 programs within it. So we have low level, if it's just, you know, people who are just maybe getting involved with drugs, we'll have a real educational program where we teach them the dangers of drugs, make sure they test clean, get off the drugs, and then we dismiss the charges completely. Up until we have drug court, where it's very intense treatment that, quite frankly, I think is better treatment than you could pay for. It's probably the best treatment around here. And we have people who would otherwise score prison, we'll let them go into what we call the stop version of the drug court program, where they get intensive treatment in lieu of prison. So I think giving those tools to prosecutors as well is very beneficial and helpful. But, you know, like you say, it's top to bottom. You got to work with law enforcement, you got to work with the judiciary, with the defense attorneys. Everybody is important to work with in those you know, the judicial system to make it work. And, you know, we help out with law enforcement. We go to law enforcement, do training. I've done a ton of different training classes with federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, and the academies, and, you know, teaching them those type of things as well. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Judge Schuman. I think that, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing there. And that is that the criminal justice system is part of the larger community. One good thing about this initiative, I think, is that they're looking at different areas, but the criminal justice system doesn't act in isolation. We're part of the larger economy, the economic opportunities in our area. I've worked with the mayor and many people on this call with the homeless shelter. You know, if you don't have, you know, a place to stay, then that's, you know, often people are arrested in lieu of for things like trespass or theft or other charges, or for doing things that would be you know, not illegal if you were in your own home. But when you have to perform the everyday functions of life in the outside environment, then it's very easy to collect criminal charges. So, but the other thing that I wanted to really emphasize was the lack of mental health spending on the state level. It's woefully, and I think we're either 49 or 50 in per capita of the states in mental health spending. There is literally no program. Well, there's one small program that we started recently to divert people charged with misdemeanors, but by and large, you know, I personally see 5,000 cases a year. A significant percentage of those people, if you just go by the general population, 15% of those have some form of mental illness, and probably a much higher percentage of people who have some form of mental illness get charged find themselves embroiled in the criminal justice system. At the state level, the spending per capita in Florida is woefully inadequate. We just don't have the resources to deal with all the social problems that are cast upon the criminal justice system. The police are left being social workers and economic advisors and mental health treatment. I mean, you know, they're really being called upon. They're being overburdened, and a lot of things that then cases then make their way into the criminal justice system that really are social issues. They have nothing to do really with criminal justice. And so it's very difficult for us, particularly in county court, because that's where those lower level offenses are. You know, it's difficult for us to deal with those societal issues without the tools that we need, the programs, the diversion programs. And we've done what we can with veterans treatment or DUI court, but you know, our efforts are still inadequate when we can't be the safety net, when the safety net has humongous holes in it. There's just not enough funding for some of these. And I'm sure the other people on this call who spend their time and professional efforts in that regard would echo that need that we have in our community. So, you know, the criminal justice system, from the police all the way through to the end, are left dealing with a lot of these social issues that are otherwise underfunded and unappreciated. And I think that's something that that needs to be addressed.
And I'll say on that regard, you're absolutely right, Judge. Unfortunately, this COVID stuff has set that back a lot too. RJ had been working with the state legislature. We actually had a bill passed, a mental health bill, to help give a lot of money that would be a partnership with the jail. Because I think you know, like with our civil citation program, giving law enforcement an alternative to an arrest is important. Because once they're in the system, it makes it more difficult. So that's right. The bill that I drove to Tallahassee with RJ several times. Federhoff had sponsored it for the House, and I think it was Tom Wright for the Senate. And we were going to be the pilot program. It was all working out, and then, you know, COVID happened. But we're trying to find alternatives to that. You know, like I was saying earlier, I've been working with Chikari Young through Daytona Beach Police Department, especially with Captain Lee, on a program that they've helped put together. You know, I think very smart. We're hopefully going to be working with the Stuart Marchman Act group to provide some mental health and alternative treatment for the low-level crime, which Daytona sees quite a bit of. You know, the prostitution, the drug charges, homeless issues, and we're hopeful that we can get take some of the local resources, and it won't cost us a lot extra, and we'll save money by not housing people in the jail. I actually am on the board of directors for Stuart Marchman Act, and was on the phone with them helping get updates on that right before I got onto this call. So we are working with that, and we've been partnering with the local community members and law enforcement to try to come up with alternatives to that, because, you know, just like the judge said, it's an issue you see from the low-level misdemeanors, you know, through sex and murder cases. The mental health and drugs is definitely a component of in the criminal system.
And again, Christy Gillis from DCF, prior to me coming to DCF, I worked with human trafficking survivors, again, in our community. And unfortunately, it was cut in February, and it was no cost to clients ages 10 to 24. We attended court. We would go to jails, crisis response. We had law enforcement contacting us, but because of some funding that was cut, the program went away, and it left a huge gap in our system, because again, it was no cost to the clients. I mean, I still have old clients that are in jail that I'm tracking right now, and I was able to go to court and advocate, he's an adult now, committed this crime, but as a youth there was complex trauma, and be able to stand there and advocate with them. And it went away, and it's been devastating to that system of care and that system of treatment. But again, mental health is definitely a gap that we see in all aspects.
Right. And it has been for a while. I think that's one thing about the criminal justice system is the back end. So all the failures up front, you'll see it at the back of criminal justice. And that being said, I just think that we're smart enough to evolve and find ways to do things. We have, and we must continue. I mean, we'll never get the funding that's necessary. So with the last 5 minutes we have before the mayor give us a closing remark, I always end sessions with this. Everyone has 30 seconds to give me what commitment can you make within your platform in terms of ensuring fairness and equity, but also accountability to the system itself. So we're the back end. So there are two systems I think are the institutions I think that are the most critical of any. You have education. I think education where you can kill dreams, and there a lot of those dreams that are killed end up in the back end of what we're talking about, and also the criminal justice system, because you can take life and liberty. And I think that those two institutions, we have very, very, very little room for error. So that's why I think it's important that we get our best and our brightest from police to the judges at the back end. I think in making sure we get our best and our brightest, but with each of you, can give us a 30-second, what commitment can you make to ensure fair, equitable system, but with building and accountability? And we'll start from the back. I see you first, State Attorney Reed, and we'll go back the other way.
Well, like we've been saying, I know we're going to continue to work with our law enforcement partners, with our community partners, try to figure out what are the problems and where we can fix the problems, and keep coming up with alternative ideas and growing with the community needs.
Thank you. Next, Stephen.
How about I'll support the Public Defender's Office and whatever initiatives it seeks to follow, being the peon that I am.
We all have a role to play.
I did not know that Steve Gosney was on the call today. He's in the appellate office in my department.
Hey, Miss Patty.
Hello, I'm a member of Faith, and I was at a Zoom meeting today all about civil citations, and I just want to thank everybody who's been working so hard on those. And the numbers are going up, and we're not where we want to be yet with 80% or more getting civil citations, but I think that's one of the best ways to show people that we are not bad guys. The police are not bad guys. They're trying to help you out. And it's a wonderful program. Thank you, everyone who's working with that.
Thank you. Judge Schuman.
Well, I would say that we will redouble our efforts to ensure equity that we do every single day, and participate in the collective advocacy efforts that this group is venturing forth with. So I'll be happy to be a part of that, any way that I can help.
Thank you. Denise?
I'm going to step into the social capital lane. I think that I may be, uniquely positioned to not only be that private citizen who talks to people in the community without having, a local role, but also having connections that are national and international and bringing that to the table.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Purdy, I know you're retired, but you still got a commitment to make. And once you retire, you still have work to do.
Well, once I retire, I'm going to be spending a whole lot more time up in St. Augustine at the Castillo de San Marcos as a volunteer for the National Park Service. That's going to be my retirement job. And invite y'all to come up sometime once we reopen the fort. But at this point, we stress greatly the educational aspect of having our attorneys trained on the professionalism that is needed to be a public defender. Public defenders for years have had a bad rap, and I've spent 16 years trying to establish a professional office that is as good as I think any in the state and possibly in the nation. And I'm very pleased with it. And one of the things that I think is one thing that we can see from the fact that through what we've gone through this past couple of months with riots in other cities and other states, that we had such a peaceful protest here, I think demonstrates that the equities are better here than in most places in the country. And I intend to continue pursuing that particular avenue. And that's about the best I can say at this point.
Thank you, Dr. User.
I just want to say, as department chair, continue to prepare students with the necessary skills and a commitment to service so that we can get them making change in the community at whatever level they whatever position they want to go in within the criminal justice field.
Suzanne?
Well, I'm gonna be talking to some of my Black pastor friends and saying, where were you today? I think it's important.
Absolutely. Collective efficacy, absolutely. Christy?
I'm going to continue with hopefully the participation in this, as well as the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice is doing a race equity challenge. And we're also having conversations afterwards, really tough and hard conversations that you don't normally have. But also I'm committed to take those conversations just outside of my work as well and into my personal life, because I think there has to be that personal change within and that advocacy, even just outside of our work.
Absolutely. Chief Young.
All right, so from a police department standpoint, we're going to continue to train. We're going to continue to recruit the best and the brightest that are a good fit for our community. We're going to continue to consistently review our policies and our procedures to ensure that they all center around the sanctity of human life and equity. We're going to continue to look for effective ways to engage our community and partner with our community. We're going to be consistent in all of our efforts. And last but not least is accountability. I have a sign up in my office that says, without accountability, policies, training, and supervision are meaningless.
Yep. Chaos without accountability, absolutely. And I would say my commitment is to continue to, I don't know how many years I have left on this earth, but I want to make them count. And I think having constructive conversation, and some of them are uncomfortable conversation, but I think this work is the work that we have to do to make this place better for our children and their children. So I just commend you for the work. I commend the mayor for taking the time to have a constructive conversation. And this wasn't talking past. And like I said, it's a deeper conversation, and there are things that we didn't get into that we'll have to get into. But I do think that this is a good start of folk coming together around a collective conversation that at the end of the day, whether we're black, white, green, or yellow, Republican, or Democrat, we all want a safe environment for our families, and we just need to work from there. So, Mr. Mayor. Unmute, Mr. Mayor.
Now it's stuck.
Yeah, that's sort of, that's a hard to mute me normally, even self-mute. But at any rate, I want to thank each of you. Thank our moderator for doing an outstanding job this afternoon in this session, and thank all of you for taking your time to engage in this process. Because at the end of the day, as I've said to everyone who's participated thus far, this will only be as successful as we make it as a community. If we don't engage in this process, it will falter. And so your presence is sincerely appreciated, but it's also needed. And so I need you to go out and to Suzanne's point, yes, we could have other voices, and there are other voices that we need because there was, you know, I learned something today that I've never focused on in my life because when my parents received a jury summons when I was a child, they went. And when I received one as an adult, I responded. And so it hadn't really dawned on me that that's just another level of inequity in our system that I need to try to address. So I truly learned that, and I think that that's something that we need to promote in our community. And there's just a lot to promote. But I also acknowledge that this work is not an easy work on any front. And so I appreciate everyone's time. And this question that we've been asked to answer is a perfect segue into our next session. Our next session is scheduled for the week of the 20th, and I will get with our facilitator to see which day will work for him and which time. It will either be 10 to 12 or 2 to 4 during that week. But one of the things that I wanted everyone to come back with, I want you to go back into your offices and into your workspaces and into your private corners and think about what else you can do that you haven't already done. Because we can all articulate what we've done. But you gotta, in order to go forward, we have to think about what's next, or what is it that we're working on that we're not doing well enough. Because when we come back in 6 or 8 months or a year from now, we want to be able to have something that we all know in our professional lives that really holds us accountable is what's measurable that we've done. You know, and I'm challenging everyone to look for ways to say that this is a measurable outcome of something that we have implemented or that we have focused on, saying that we're going to improve in our office or in our walk, that will push the needle forward. Because at the end of the day, that picture is not right. It's just not right. And we realize, and I talked to one gentleman earlier in the week, and he was saying how some people don't believe in that picture. They believe in the picture to the left, that if you give everybody the same thing, that's all that we're responsible for in society. And we can't begrudge them, because maybe perhaps legally that might be accurate in some ways. But I'm saying that to say to those of us who are on this call, that's a question that we really have to answer. If it is, are we truly committed to that picture? And it's not, you know, as the News Journal consistently articulates, it's not all about race for me. I really haven't used the word race in my discussions. It's really just about extending opportunities and fairness across the board for everyone. And so I will close out by saying I appreciate you all. So look for ways that you can push yourselves. That's number one when we come back. Look for ways that you can collaborate with one another. How can we collaborate with one another to push this needle forward? And then how will I hold myself and my agency and my institution accountable to changing the dynamic? So thanks. In conclusion, I will also say, use that email address if you have information as it relates to any topic on equity that you want us to share with all of our participants. We have probably 200 people across the board who have signed up. to participate in our various meeting sessions, maybe 250. I haven't looked at the numbers, but there's information that we need to be given out so that we can share, because my style as a leader is not to preach, but it is to give folks an opportunity to learn by presenting information and allowing them to digest it, process it, and then talk about it. That was the way I operated as a history teacher, and it's the way I operate really as a leader. I like to give people an opportunity to process information, then we come back and see if we can chop it up together. So we will be sharing a lot of information with you. One of the things that, two of the things that's come up with us that we want to encourage people to do. We encourage you all to take some sort of an assessment, an implicit bias assessment. We want to encourage you to have that done in your agencies if you haven't already done it. We are also working on what I call a poverty simulation. And many of you have gone through these types of programs, but the problem is that most of these poverty simulations have been done in the past. You know, they haven't been done virtually. So I'm trying to work with some folks to see if we could possibly figure a way to do that, to do it virtually, so that it can impact our work. It can impact our ethos. It can impact our sense of compassion at the end of the day. And for me, you know, justice without compassion is not usually just. So I will leave it at that and say thank you to each of you for your participation. Stay engaged. This process depends on your engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.